So let's carry on here with more line work. And I'm gonna have a brush size of 1 here next to this bigger C subline that we had with brush size 2. And let's just get a better angle here on that to kind of close it off here at that part. And let's zoom into this side view here. And let's give this a little bit more of a line here as well to add more detail here. The inside of that thing. And let me just go back here into that view. What I want to do is have another line coming out here. This time also a smaller line here, brush size 1. And we kind of connect it here with this part of the detail on the side that we have. Let's snap back here to the front view of it. And I want to use the Z add on a brush size of 1 here to follow along. Let's just get a different angle. I'm gonna have a C sub here to add one of these details here. Let me just do that again. And then also more Z add here to kind of seal that off here, this part. And I want to add one of these small details in here, and that's C sub. Follow it along with another C sub to make it stand out a bit more, which looks really nice here. And I'm gonna have a Z sub here going along that line as well, kind of to break it up and support that a bit more. Looked a bit too loose before. So now here, same thing, I'm gonna have a C sub line. And once again, guys, I know this looks terrible here. I'm voice narrating the tutorial here, so I'm seeing what you're seeing, and I'm sorry that there is so much lag. It's something that I didn't see when I was actually recording the tutorial. You have to imagine it that while I was recording it, it's just real time for me. It doesn't do these lags, and it's something that I'm not sure exactly what caused it. But one thing that I'm pretty confident about is that I probably should get a new computer, so that hopefully makes it better for future tutorials. Either way, I'm gonna have more Z add lines here, also along these lines. And I have a very good reason to upgrade for a new computer, because next year Flight Simulator comes out, and I think I want to have one killer machine of a computer for that, which hopefully then also benefits these tutorials. So I'm gonna have another Z add line here. Let me just do that again. Connect it up here. And then have another Z add line here along these details. Kind of follow that path. Gonna use Shift here, Z add, C sub, C add, to add once again one of these tiny dot details, which are always nice. To kind of break the flow a little bit. And I want to continue this line down here. So let's take a look at it here from that side as well, and connect it so that it looks more in place there with this other subtool coming out of it. Let me just get a better angle here. Just gonna turn ghost mode off for a moment and add another Z add line here. Let me just undo that. That was not as good as it could have been. And let's take another look at it here from the top perspective. I want to add 3 strokes here of Z add into this tiny detail here. And I'm just gonna take it here into isolation mode and have another Z subline here coming out of this and connect it here with that. Let's just make sure it's properly connected. And then follow it along here with a Z add. And basically the idea that I had is that the whole lines that we have here resemble a little bit like leaves, you know, like a plant that kind of grows upwards. So I also want to maintain that flow. Let me just get out of isolation mode and undo this line that I had there because you wouldn't even see it. Instead, I'm gonna have a C subline here following along these borders that we already have there. And then bring that into here, which makes it look completed. And we're going to carry on by finding a better angle here. Let's snap back into the top perspective. I'm gonna take it into isolation mode as well. And what I want to do is have another line of Z sub coming out here. Just gonna redo that with a bit of a curve there to make it more interesting. And then I'm just gonna follow it a bit further here and also have this going around that curve there. So next I wanna add some Z subs here into this line that we have there, which is pretty thick, and that kind of breaks it up, makes it also more interesting to look at. And let me carry on here with some more C sub as well. Gonna use the shift key to bring it up here and then connect it there to that other side. And then follow it with a C add line. And C sub and C add to have another one of these tiny gaps there that basically make an extra detail. And I'm just gonna follow it here with another C sub to connect it better there. Sometimes it's crucial to follow that twice there on these intersections. And some more Z add there as well. Just gonna undo this one there. Zoom in and make a bit more of a depth there with Z sub and Z add. And I want to have some more details coming out of this element here as well. So let me just bring that down here all the way. Let's take a look at it here from a distance. And then also complete it with another Z add line following along that. Let's take another look here at it. Gonna be here out of the isolation mode. Take a look at it here from our side. And basically I want to have some more details here. So I'm gonna have another line coming out of that here. Rotate the camera to also connect it here at the back. And then do the C add work right after here. And of course then also connect it here. And let's see what else we can do here. Rotate around a bit. And let's focus here on another part, which is this piece that we were creating earlier. And if you remember, we were using the rectangular mass tool to push out some extra geometry there out of this cylinder. So let's Z-remesh it. So far it was only Dynamesh. And now I just want to smooth it out a bit as well. Always important that whenever you Z-remesh something, you want to make sure to smooth it a bit if it looks a little bumpy, which is very often the case if you're Z-remeshing straight from the Dynamesh, because Dynamesh tends to be more bumpy in general, and Z-remesh tries to just replicate what it basically has in front of it. So I'm actually gonna disable the undo history, which means whenever I save, I won't have my history the next time. And that hopefully fastens up here a bit the whole thing with the rotation. I think that might be a part of that. So I was just subdividing this 3 times, which brings it to 300,000 points here. If you look at the bottom left, I'm gonna go here into our ghost mode, and I'll have our trim brush set to 2 in the draw size. And then I like to do another line here with draw size 1, which is kind of framing this. Let me also have another detail coming out of this here with more C sub so far. And let's take a look at it here from the front, or the top perspective, I should say. And I want to also add a bit more of a line here to make it look a bit more sealed off there. And another line here along this detail of the other subtool, which is always a good idea. Makes it look like it's been properly welded or forged that way. It kind of complements it. And now let me just do some more Z add here along these lines. Gonna have a Z sub and a Z add here. And then another C sub here to make this basically a small detail that's kind of standing out there. And Z add and Z sub. You can see how this is really powerful to play with just Z add and Z sub while doing one line pretty much. Can make for super nice details already. I almost got the feeling that this helped that I deleted the undo history. It's not as bad as before. So let's hope it stays that way. No guarantees, but overall it seems better to me. So I'm gonna have some Z sub and Z add here as well on this detail. Let's zoom out. Let's carry on by having another look here at this piece. Should be almost completed, but it doesn't look too well connected here. So I want to have a bit of a smoothed out surface before I add another Z sub line here that follows along pretty much the other element that we have there sticking out of it. So it looks like it's properly in place. And speaking of other elements, let's select this subtool here, which so far is only a Dynamesh. If we look at it here in the polyframe view, I want to have our Z-remesher on that, and I'm just gonna have the default target poly count of 5. So let's subdivide it a few times. Let's see where we are. 130 is not enough. So I'm gonna divide it so that we have 5 subdivision levels here on it, which brings it to 2.1 million points, which is quite a lot, but that should be good for this kind of an element, which is quite big. And let's make sure we have our symmetry on here. Activate symmetry on X and on Y. And before we start with the small details, I want to use the H polish brush once more here, now that we have Z-remeshed it, and go along these borders here to give it a bit more of a hard edge in some of these parts. Let's take a look at it. And also here from the top view, let's take a look at it. I'm gonna go down here on the first subdivision level, and I just want to go back here to our move brush and make double sure that this looks more like an even line there, or an even curve, where before it was a little bumpy. So always pay attention to your silhouette, but that was really just one tiny move that I had to do there. Now let's take our trim brush, and I'm gonna have it here in isolation mode. We have symmetry on, and I'm gonna start here to go in the ghost mode actually, so that we see where our other subtools are. I'm gonna start here by having a line. Let me just Control Z that. Sometimes takes a few attempts. Gonna have this line here, basically like a curve going around, and then connecting it here with this line. And then let's have another line parallel to these ones that we were just drawing, only that here we're gonna make a right turn pretty much. Here let's have another line coming out of it. And then also here a bit with a curve there on both the front and the end. And let's just get a different angle on it here to connect it at the back. And yeah, I think that getting rid of the undo history was definitely helping it. It's not rotating as slowly anymore as before. I mean, it's still not perfect. Don't want to jinx it. Maybe it gets worse. But overall, it's much better than what it was. So I'm gonna have a Z subline here going parallel to these lines that we were already drawing here, to make that a bit more interesting looking. And also follow it along here. Doesn't have to be in one go. We can also take a break pretty much and then resume that. It's often really hard to make everything perfectly in one line, especially if it's curved. And I want to do the same thing over here. So far it's only C sub. Follow along this curve here. And then let's reposition the camera here and add a Z add line. I'm gonna have it to that point here, and then have another line following here. Another case where it's easier just to basically have free strokes instead of trying to get it all done in one. Or here even a fourth one. Want to have a C sub detail there, followed then by Z add. To make that more interesting, I'm gonna have another Z sub in there to add a bit more depth to it. And now let's also follow that here with more Z add and C sub. And once again, if it's not perfect, you can always Control Z and try again. It's sometimes really hard to get one line perfectly done here in one stroke. I want to have this kind of a detail here in there. So one stroke of Z add in our Z sub detail there. And let's take a look at it here while we are in isolation mode from different angles, and I want to zoom in here from the top again. Have a Z sub and a Z add, and follow that here with another Z sub, and then also continue it here. And while we are working here on these Z sublines with a draw size of 1, let me just Ctrl Z that and try to get a better angle on it. Let's just continue to do that here also with the other lines. So I'm gonna follow that here. Smaller detail next to the big one, and also here I want to have another Z sub to complete it properly there where it meets both ends in the center. And now I want to have some curvy detail here on that part, so I'm gonna have Z sub. You just undo that, add a bit of an extra curve there, and a third one as well to make that a bit more interesting here. Let's just zoom in, and often this is a bit of the problem that there's not enough depth there, so you got to zoom in there and just add a bit of an extra stroke. So let's take a look here from our top view. From different angles, I also want to add some lines here on that part. So I'm gonna just be in draw size 1 here. Start with the Z sub. And then I'm just gonna have a Z add following that along. Doesn't have to be one stroke, so I'm gonna pause it here and continue with the second one, and also make use of the shift key sometimes to make it easier, especially if you have like a straight line where you can just use shift. And now I want to have some more lines here as well, similar to what we have there on the left side. When you look at it here from that perspective, to fill that out a bit more here, this detail. And also here another one. Try to make it as parallel as possible to the already existing lines, so that it doesn't look like it's completely out of place there. The more parallel, the better in that case. And let me just find a different angle here to add some extra detail here on that part as well. So let's take a look here from the top, and that might also require yet another detail to kind of have the same style that we already have there on the other parts. Some smaller lines close next to each other. And also here I want to have some Z sub line to make it look like these subtools are actually properly welded together. Add a Z add here, and let's try to get another angle. I'm just gonna get out of the transparency mode so that we see everything here as one piece, which often helps to just get an overall impression of where we are. So let's add another Z add line here on that part here. Connect it here at the top. And Let me get another angle and also go into our isolation mode. Sometimes takes a while to position the camera in the best way. I want to have a Z subline coming along here on the top and then following it here into the other segment pretty much. From when you look at it here from the side, the inner side, so to say, which so far doesn't have any details, but we're just about to change that. So let's have another line coming out of this one. And once again, let's try to find a different angle here. Let's connect it here from the back, where I also have a Z subline coming out, and then connect it over here to that part. And let me just undo that, do that again, and use the Shift key to have a straight line, which we then connect there to the upper part. And then what I want to do is have one of these double lines here in the center. And I want to fill it out here with one of these things. I should probably come up with a name for these kinds of details, like a filler line maybe, something like that. Because every time I make that here, I wonder like what should I call it. So maybe it would be good to give it a name. Maybe filler line is not the worst. Horizontal filler line. Anyways, sorry, I'm just getting caught up here in thoughts. Let's carry on here with a Z add line and also follow that along. And connect these details that we already have here. And also here on the top, I want to have a Z add line. And then connect it here with the line that we already did. I'm going to use the Shift key to make it easier. And I also want to have a Z add line here. I'm going to have a Z add with a Z sub to add one of these extra details. And then connect it here on the top. And this still needs some more Z add support lines here. So I'm going to use Shift key, bring it here to the top, and then carry on here on that side. And let me just undo that. I actually want to have a C subline here. And then we fill that here with a Z add, which gives it more contrast if we have a C subline under it. And let's take a look at it. So let's go back here into our isolation mode. And let's zoom in here and complete this line that we made here with another Z add. And also let's take a look at it here where we have this kind of a detail here, which is also requiring some more extra Z add. Z add, Z sub, Z add to have a bit of an extra detail there. And let me just fill that here with Z sub and Z add. One of these filler details, as I was naming it earlier. So now let's snap in here from our top. And I want to be working on this piece here, which so far we didn't do any work on yet. I'm going to Z remesh it, make sure to have symmetry on X and Y. And let's subdivide it 4 times. That brings us to around 1.4 million points. I'm gonna go over here to our ghost mode. And I'm just gonna snap it in here from the side and from the top perspective so that we have enough space to work on. And I want to change our standard lazy mouse radius from 20 to 60 here on the trim brush, and then just have one continuous line pretty much following this whole segment. Let's get out of the transparency mode, or let's just toggle it to see what it looks like. And I want to take it here into our isolation view and have another line which we're gonna lead down here, snap into the side view of it, and I'm just gonna Control Z that until I get it right. And now let's just use the Shift key and have some interesting looking curves here. I just want to be jumping in and out of the isolation view to make sure that we're not going into the other subtool pretty much. And I'm gonna put the lazy mouse radius back to 20, which is our default. So now let's take another look. I'm gonna undo that, and I'm just gonna have it here in the ghost mode to follow our subtool pretty much, the other one, and make it look like it's actually framed. So now let's concentrate here on the top of it, or the front of it, and connect this here. Let me just once again go into the isolation mode and take this element here and have another Z sub line here connecting that. And once again here, one of these details. And I'm gonna have Z sub and Z add for it. And here also Z add, Z sub, and more Z add to break up the flow a little bit, make it more interesting. And let me reposition the camera. Gonna have another line of Z sub here, and I want to follow it with a Z add. And then let me just Control Z that so that we have a nice line of Z add also here. Z add, Z sub, Z add. So let's complete it here. And let's take a look here. Want to have another one of these filler details. Let me just get that right here. So I'm gonna have Z sub and then follow it along here, and then use the Shift key to kind of connect it here to the upper part of the other line that we have. And yeah, once again, toggling out of the ghost mode is often recommended just so that we really see what it looks like without that ghost mode look, and in combination here with the other subtools. So I'm gonna have another line here coming out of that. Let me just Control Z that. Try again here. Bit of a zigzag line, which I think will look cool here. So let's go here into our side view now and reposition the camera, and then use the Shift key to follow here the lines that we already did, but breaking it up a bit here. And then we want to have our Z add lines as a support. Use the Shift key again Gonna have Z add, Z sub, and Z add. And then just complete it here to that point. So let's also try to add some Z add here on that. And for that, I'm gonna have our lazy radius increased once more so that it's easier. And I know I'm saying easy, it might not be as easy as it looks. So if you need a few Control Z's for that, no problem. It sometimes can take a while, like you see me also struggling here. Let's just try to get it right here. Something like that. So now we have this element also nice and detailed pretty much. And let me put the lazy radius back to our default, which is 20. And I want to have like this Z sub detail in there, so that when you look at it from the top, there's a bit of a breakup. Something that makes for an interesting eye-catching detail. And now let's zoom in it here from the top. And I'm gonna increase our draw size to 2 and have a bit of a bigger line here. Actually gonna undo that and also put our lazy radius back to a bit of a higher parameter, like 40, so that it makes it easier to have a line here following along. So let's have our draw size back to 1 and follow that line here sort of parallel. And here yet another line coming out of this. Let me just undo that and do again, so that it kind of complements the details that we already did on some other parts there on this subtool. And I want to have even another one here. So let's make sure it kind of connects there with this detail in the center. And let me zoom out. I think that starts looking pretty cool here overall, our center of the sword. Gonna have our lazy radius back to standard. And I just want to go over to subtool, press shift here on this eyeball button, toggle it on and off, to make double sure we have everything here unhidden in our viewport. And now I want to focus on that piece that we have here in the center of these leather straps. So first thing, let's make sure we have symmetry on. And this time I want to have it on X, Y, and Z, basically on all of the axes. So let me take it into isolation mode and I just want to test it here. You can see symmetry doesn't seem to be working. That's because we also want to have local symmetry on here on that piece. Essentially, you can always have local symmetry on. Sometimes it's not 100% required, but it won't hurt to have it on, unless you have something in mind where you don't need it. So I'm gonna have Z remeasure enabled and do the usual where we smooth everything out here on the hard edges before then we use our trim brush to do some more work on it with our details. So let's make sure we have all these jagged edges smoothed out, and I'm gonna divide it 3 times so that we are ending up at around 700,000 points here if you look at the bottom left. And I'm gonna take it into isolation view, and I'm just gonna have a brush size of 1 here on our trim brush, and I want to have these outer edges here with a Z add, and then next to it I'm gonna have Z sub and Z add and add this nice little detail here in the center. And then let me just get out of the isolation mode to see what it looks like. I'm gonna have a brush size of 2 here, to make one of these elements here. Center detail, or whatever I called it earlier. And then let's have another line of Z add here going around it. And let me just get another angle on it here. Connect this here with a Z sub. And then also have another Z sub coming along here, followed by another one next to it. So also here where we have the Z add, I want to have another complementing Z sub plus a Z add. And that way we get some nice detail in there. Just going to zoom in a bit and follow along these lines that we just made here with a Z add. Let me go over here to our ghost mode. And I want to have another Z sub here to kind of follow along the line that we already did. And let me get back to this part here with another Z add to make that more detailed looking as it was. And now let's zoom in here where we can have yet another one of these Z sublines here along this detail that we already have. And once again, I'm rotating around here. Let me kind of strengthen that detail here with another Z add followed by a Z sub to make it more separated looking. So let's focus on these leather straps. Actually, let me go back here to this detail that we were just working on. Now that I look at it here from that angle. And what I want to do is have our brush size set to 2. And then have one of these filler details here in the center. So I'm just going to have one stroke. Put it back to 1, the brush size. And kind of follow along here with a Z sub. And I'm going to have 2 of these Z subs and then here one of the Z add lines. And while we're at it, let's have another Z add line here along that. And I think that should be enough here for this ring detail. And now we can focus here on our leather straps. So first of all, we want to Z remesh it. So now that we have Z remeshed it, let's also divide it here 3 times. That brings us to around 444,000 points. Just gonna smooth it a little bit here at the front. But other than that, it's leather. It's okay if it looks a bit bumpy. So we don't really need to do too much detail work on that. This piece here, I just want to bring our subdivision level back to 2 and divide it once more. So that brings us also around 470,000 points, pretty much the same as on the other side where we have the leather stripes. And now let's focus here on that piece. I want to actually smooth it a bit here on these parts that we were pulling out earlier. And also here around these parts, let's make it a bit more beveled by simply smoothing it. And then let me go back here into our ghost mode, and I want to have our rectangular masking brush once more. Make a selection here for that. Make sure it's square enough. I want to invert that mask, go over to our move brush, and then move it into that snake head. Go over to the side view and kind of scale it outwards so that it's sticking out. And I want to get rid of our mask and dynamesh it here by just drawing a selection here into the viewport. And now we have this weird piece here, which is not really visible, but let's just smooth it so that it's kind of gone, and also dynamesh it once more. So Dynamesh just to retopologize. And then I want to smooth that out here a bit, that element that we were just pushing out. So that way that snake head looks a bit more connected there as it was before. I want to actually select the snake head and add some clay buildup here, so that it looks like this other piece is sort of stuck really in there forcefully. And let's just also use our smooth brush then to make sure it's not too jagged, too edgy. And here I'm gonna use the sub brush on the clay buildup, C sub. And then with more clay buildup, let's just also cover these edges here and build up some more geometry here in combination with our smooth brush. And that way our snake head already looks more interesting as it did before, where everything was just perfectly flat. So let me go back here to that piece. I want to smooth that a bit more here, this element that we were just pushing out. And also here on these parts, let's just smooth it. And let's go over here to Z-remesher and Z-remesh it, obviously. And then followed by a little bit more smoothing here. Let's make sure it doesn't look bumpy. And here on these sides, because we have symmetry on X and Y and also local symmetry, I want to divide it 4 times, which brings us to around 1.26 million points here. I'm just going to smooth it a bit. Actually, let me go back here to the 3rd subdivision level to smooth that. Otherwise, on subdivision level 4, it's already too high poly to really affect it too much with a smooth brush. Let me exit the ghost mode, and I want to use our H polish brush here with a draw size of 5. And I want to be here on the 1st subdivision level here for this piece to kind of get a bit more contrast in there on the edges, like we were doing earlier on the other piece. It's good to use the H polish brush here on a lower subdivision level. And I want to have a bit of a curve there on the top. And then also H polish it a bit here on the sides. Use the smooth brush here on that part, and then in combination with our H polish. And that just gives it a bit more of a hard surface kind of a look. You can also use the H polish brush basically with Z add information if you press the Alt key. So that way we can have some details actually coming out here, similar to the clay buildup, but just more subtle. Let me just take a look here at some other angles. Might want to also H polish it a bit here around this detail and basically set the groundwork for once we come in with our trim brush and make these details to already have a bit of a contrast and some better shape. And I'm gonna have it back here to our 4th subdivision level. And then let's take our trim brush once we have it here in the top perspective. And I want to put our brush size to 2. And let me also get over here to our ghost mode. Symmetry on X and Y. Well, we already had that. And I'm gonna start here with some C sublines along some of these details here. I'm gonna stop the C sub pretty much there in the middle, because that enables us then to later connect this detail in a different way here. And let me take a look here at the other side, where I also want to have a C sub here. C sub, and then connect it. And back here to this side, let's have one of these details here, these center details. Center filler details, or whatever we want to call it. It's an often used detail, but it's a nice one. In the normal map, it looks good and it's very easy to do. So I like to use it. Let's have the same thing here. And now let me just put the brush size back to 1 so that we can also have some smaller details here. And I'm gonna carry on here with more C sublines. Another one here coming out of this one. And then following along the line that we already made. And this detail here could also need another line. So let's break it up a bit there with that bit of a sharp curve. Doesn't always have to be one perfect flow all the way around. It's good to break it up sometimes, the flow. And here I want to do also more C sub. Gonna have some C add later. For now, let's just focus on the actual look, which is always good to start with C sub in most cases. So I'm gonna have another one here on that part. Let me just redo that. Better here from that angle, from the top angle. Let me select this snake hat because the snake is kind of in the way here. So I'm gonna have our clay build up. Press the Alt key to kind of chip that off there and give more visibility here to our detail that we are currently working on. Let me just double check here on the other side. May also want to take a little bit away here to make that a bit more straight. And let's go back to brush size 1 on our trim brush and resume the work here on this element. And I'm gonna have a Z add line here following along the C sublines that we already did. And also I want to have another C subline here in support of this filler element that we had there. And then follow this here with a C add and a C sub and another Z add to make that more interesting. And sometimes I just like to toggle the ghost mode on and off, or the isolation mode. It's good to not always be in the same mode, just to have different views on it. So let's take this here and also add another C subline along this small detail. And then I'm gonna have another line of C add and C sub coming out of this here. And you can also make use of the Shift key to make a straight line. So overall, quite liking this detail here. This might still require a little bit of extra details. So I'm gonna have a Z subline here coming out straight there and then following along this part. And let's take a look at it here. Needs to be a bit, Control Z, a bit more connection here at that part. And I want to follow this here along with another Z sub to make it stand out a bit more. And here also. which will then benefit our normal map later. And let's add a Z add line here as well. That wasn't perfect, so I'm just gonna Control Z until I get it right. This looks better aligned than before. And I'm gonna have a Z sub detail here by pressing Alt key. And then fill it here with one of these guys. Like 3 strokes should be fine here on that. And this here might also need another Z sub. And I'm gonna connect it also here with one of these details. And kind of make that more visible here by having Z sub information under it. And overall this looks pretty detailed. Let's take another look at it here from different angles. And add some more line work here on that piece. Let's just get out of the ghost mode and take it into isolation so that we can also cover this side here more. Even if we don't always see it, it's good to kind of complete a line and don't just leave it open. Because you never know, maybe we want to change the snake hat and then it becomes visible. So it's a good thing to just complete a line and not just leave it, basically end it there in the middle of nowhere. In case we want to change something on another subtool and it becomes visible. Meanwhile, I'm doing some more lines here with a C sub. And this here could also need a bit more contrast, so I'm gonna have another C sub here, connecting the top there. And I think that this looks pretty detailed. And let's go over here to our snake hat and use our move brush to align that a bit better here, the snake part, with this subtool that we were just working on.